we come across the very first commandment of what is called the Hudood laws, or the Qisas, or the penal codes of Islam. And of course, what are the Hudood? The Hudood are punishments that are enacted by a legitimate Islamic state that is judging by the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against people, criminals who have done specific crimes against other people. So murder and rape and stealing, these are Hudood punishments where society is at risk, and therefore the Islamic Sharia has come with punishments to keep such people in check. Now, Surah Al-Baqarah is the first time that when you're reading the Quran, you will come across your first had punishment. And so we need to pause here and a little bit talk about this. And once again, this is one of those areas that causes sometimes a little bit of confusion. It is also used by the far right and the extremists to paint Islam in a very negative manner. But once again, you read the Quran, and rather than anything negative, wallahi, we feel a sense of pride, a sense of izzah. This is the reality and the truth we should all be proud of. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 178. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykum al-qisasu fil qatla. O you who believe, qisas is prescribed for you when somebody is killed, when somebody is murdered. Qisas is a retaliation, a life for a life. Al-hurru bil-hurri wal-abdu bil-abdi wal-untha bil-untha. Every single person, whoever they are, whether they're male or female, whether they're slave or free, doesn't matter. Everyone who murders, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, kutiba alaykum al-qisas. That retribution, or the penalty of basically the murder is going to be executed. So qisas here means he took a life. Now once he is caught, the trial is done, the evidence is given, it is proven that he was a murderer, then the penalty for him killing somebody is for this person himself to be executed. And of course, the whole notion of the hudud being, they say it is backward, it is harsh, it is this and that, and the fact of the matter, once again, no, not at all. Not at all. Because when you really understand the hudud, you understand the philosophy of these laws of Islam, subhanallah, you are in awe at how perfect this sharia is. In these very verses about the punishment of murder, Allah says, Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. In this law of execution, there is your own life. In killing the life of the murderer, there is your own life. Ya ulil albab, O people of intellect, if you only understood. Allah is saying, don't be sheep, think. Be brave enough to challenge, understand. And Allah is saying that in this law of qisas, there is your own life, O people of intellect. What this means, if you don't have intellect, you won't understand. If you're just going to follow, just like an ignorant person, just mimic, just cry, whatever they say, sloganeering, oh, Islam is this, Islam is that. If you're just going to be shallow, then doesn't matter, you're not going to understand. If you have intellect, ya ulil albab, reflect and think. And Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us, in this law of qisas, there is your own life. And of course, the meaning here is very, very obvious. When the punishment for the murderer is so harsh, it will cause a potential murderer to think twice. It will cause somebody to say, you know what, I don't want to go down that route. If they're very angry at somebody, if they want to do something wrong, they themselves will be kept in check. And so, not only will the murderer not murder if he knows that there's a possibility that his own life is going to be forfeit, but the life of the murderer himself will be saved. In other words, this law of qisas is saving two lives at the cost of just the law. And that is not only the murdered, but the murderer. وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. And of course, we can also point out here that the Sharia of Islam has a very high bar to prove any crime. It's a very difficult thing to prove. And yes, indeed, once it is proven, the punishment is going to be enacted. But then, and here's a really amazing reality, smack dab in the middle of the verses of qisas, right in the middle of those verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a phrase here, which again, when you read it, you don't fully understand because we don't know the context, meaning the average person might not understand it. But of course, the scholars of Islamic law, the books of tafsir, they go into this detail. فَمَنْ عُفِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ شَيْءٌ فَاتِّبَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَدَاءٌ إِلَيْهِ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Whoever is forgiven by his brother, then let him follow up that forgiveness with goodwill, and let him pay the penalty with ihsan, with excellence. What is this cryptic phrase here? Whoever is forgiven, let him follow up with good manners, let him pay the debt with ihsan. What is this cryptic phrase here? In the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, listen to this. Yes, indeed, the murderer, if he's caught, if it's proven, he deserves to be executed. But Allah is saying, if the family of the deceased decides to forgive, if they realize that, you know what, we're not going to gain anything by killing one more person, then that's good for them. And the one who was the murderer should feel indebted to that family and should follow that up with good actions and remorse, and then follow that up by paying a financial penalty, a debt. And in Islamic law, it goes even more detailed than this. It's really amazing and fascinating. And Surah Al-Baqarah is the basis for all of these laws. So I'm just going to briefly mention that in an ideal Islamic land where all of these laws are enacted. So suppose the murderer is caught, he is found guilty. Now, the right of execution is in the hands of the family of the one who was murdered. And so that family will be brought by the judge. And according to some books of law, each family member, each one of the inheritors, men and women, by the way, men and women will be brought forth. And the judge will ask them, you want to forgive for the sake of Allah? If you forgive, it is better. The judge will remind them what the Quran itself says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the other surah, Surah Al-Isra, that if he forgives, it is better for him. It's very explicit that Allah is commanding us or encouraging us to forgive even this crime. So the question arises, what if there's 10 family members and they don't have unanimous consensus? What happens then? Our Islamic law says if there's 10 family members and even one of them says, I'll forgive for the sake of Allah, then the rest are obliged, because you cannot save 1/9, you cannot save 1/10, excuse me. If one person of the entire family says, I want Allah's reward, then that person is not going to be executed. But then you're going to say, that's not fair. How about the other 9? They're angry, they want their retribution. And this leads us to what Allah is saying, فَاتِّبَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَدَاءٌ إِلَيْهِ بِإِحْسَانٍ. He has to repay the debt with excellence, because if they are forgiven for the execution, there is a penalty that will come, that is a financial penalty. And it's a huge penalty in Islamic law. 100 camels back in the day, these days they have the dollars and the equivalents, but 100 camels back in the day, that is a mini fortune. And of course this person would have to spend the rest of his life paying off that debt, because that's the point. You don't just get off scot-free. But see, in all of this, in Surah Al-Baqarah, we learn that there is indeed harsh penalties. There's no question about it. The laws are there. But the fact of the matter is that these laws are rarely implemented. And even at the very last minute, one family member can stand up and say, I forgive for the sake of Allah. And forgiving for the sake of Allah is encouraged in the Quran, that when you forgive, Allah will forgive you. So the whole philosophy of Islamic punishments is so radically different. The goal of the punishment is not to have vengeance. It's not to persecute and kill. No, the goal is وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ, to have a civil society in which you don't have to worry about murder and rape and pillaging and plunder and stealing. No, you want a sane, a civil society. وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ. So when you have the harsh penalties in the book, which are rarely actually implemented, that's just, you just say on the side, but the penalties are there, everybody knows. And yes, every once in a while the murder will be executed, every once in a while the rapist will be every once in a while. So everybody knows. And yes, it seems very harsh, but in that harshness, the crime rate goes down. The murder rate is almost non-existent. People are safe. And that is what Allah is saying in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That, O people of intellect, understand there is wisdom and there is benefit and there is life for you in this regard.
فيا ذلي ويا خجلي إذا ما قال لي ربي أما استحييته تعصيني ولا تخشى من العتب وتخفي الذنب عن خلقي وتأبى في الهوى قربي فتب مما جنيت عسى تعود إلى رضا الرب تعود إلى رضا الرب